The tenant has to actually do something. Otherwise, you're not going to get the money.
Absolutely. And if the tenant does something, you can't do anything under the laws for the city of Los Angeles. And in fact, if you bring forth, let's say, make a demand, you got to pay me, I'll serve you a 3-day notice, the tenant has a right to sue you for harassment. I kid you not. And not pay a penny. The landlord has no right to bring forth an unlawful detainer. The landlord has no right to seek a regular civil lawsuit for the money. The landlord has no right to terminate the tenancy, but let's say it's a single family home, and let's pretend the lease was over the end of February, this month, February 28th. You can't ask the tenant to move. You can't serve a notice to quit. You can't file an unlawful detainer. You can't file a regular civil lawsuit, and the guy can sit there for 36 months.
Welcome back to another episode of the Residual Real Estate Agent Podcast. We have with us an absolute rock star. He is the guy that you need to know if you have tenants that you want to get out. He's a former president of the Apartment Association. His name is Mr. Dennis Block. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you, Dennis. So we'll cut right to the chase because we know that your time is valuable. What is the state of evictions right now in California versus Los Angeles County versus Los Angeles City?
Okay, well, this is going to be a little bit of an education. So if you got a pen and paper, I would pull it out now because there's many dates and situations that you should write down. Or the best thing to do is this podcast, you can replay it at your leisure because there really is a lot to talk about. Literally, we have 3 competing governmental agencies, each stacking more havoc and abuse on income property owners, which is exactly what it is. And never in our society have we had such an assault on income property owners as we have now, where literally the government is forcing one segment of society to support another segment of society, dealing with concepts of social welfare. Well, at least the entire populace, through their tax dollars, are trying to help out the truly needy. In this situation, without question, you have one person helping out another person where you don't even have to be truly needy. And yet the government is forcing people to give up their services, their goods and services at literally no charge. It's truly a taking. And of course, there have been a couple of lawsuits filed already, which hopefully when they reach the federal court level will be in favor of property owners. I know there's lawsuits against the county of LA, there's lawsuits against the city. But since we are in a situation where we have to live under the laws that currently exist, let's go over them. If you're not in the county of Los Angeles or the city of Los Angeles, under the state law, if a tenant owes you rent through next month, through March of 2022, you're going to need to apply for rent relief before you can really file an eviction lawsuit for non-payment of rent. So in those areas, there's a website which is called housingiskey.com, housingiskey.com, and you have to apply for all rent owed from March 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2022. That's why I said get your papers out. Any rent owed for that what is that? I don't know, 13, 14-month period, that you have to apply for rent relief before you can go forward with an eviction. If you have applied and it's been 20 days and you haven't been paid, then you have the right to serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Now, this is not the old standard one that you have. You can go to my website, which is right over my right shoulder. It's evict123.com, and you'll get the brand new 2-page 3-day notice. Now, you can only ask for rent for the period of October 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. For that period of time is the only time you can ask for rent. If you're owed rent prior to that, then you have to go to small claims court and you can sue there. And they have opened up the limitation in small claims court. Normally it's $10,000. Now it's unlimited if you're seeking COVID rent. Once again, COVID rent goes from March 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2022. Okay, but right now, if a tenant owes you rent and you're not in LA County, then you can serve a 3-day notice. The 3-day notice has to be limited to, once again, from October, I don't make this stuff up, October 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. You serve a 3-day notice. You've already applied for rent relief and you haven't gotten paid within 20 days, and then you can go forward with an eviction and attempt to evict that tenant. Now, right now, if you have a single family home, a townhouse or a condominium, or a property that was built within 15 years, less than 15 years, that property is not subject to any rent control. And outside the county of Los Angeles, you can just serve a notice to terminate a month-to-month tenancy. So if you want to sell that house, you want to list it with your wonderful broker, or you want to move into your own house and you're not subject to any rent control statute, then you have the right just to serve a 60-day notice, assuming the tenant's been there longer than 1 year, then you can serve a 60. If they're less than 1 year, then you can serve a 30-day notice. Also, again, outside the county of Los Angeles, if you want to evict a rent-controlled tenant that's subject to statewide rent control, so let's pretend it's a 8-unit apartment building that you just bought, but it's older than 15 years, then you have the right to serve a 60-day notice if you want to renovate the unit. So any property owners out there that their property is not subject to a local rent control statute like LA City or LA County, but you're in, let's say, a civilized place to own property like Riverside or San Bernardino, Ventura, or Orange County for the most part, and you're subject now to statewide rent control because it's multiple units older than 15 years, you can get every tenant out just by doing what they call a renovation eviction. That's a popular reason that we can use right now. So, for example, the work has to take longer than 30 days to complete, and you have to require a building permit. So bottom line is you're going to redo the kitchen, you're going to redo the bathroom or both, and then you have the right to ask the tenants to move. You do the work, and then, of course, you can raise the rent to market level. So we have a lot of play outside of the county of Los Angeles, even if your property is subject to statewide rent control. Obviously, if it's not subject to any rent control, then we have a clear and easy path to seek our rent. Oh my God, you mean we can really get our rent? Yeah, and outside the county of Los Angeles, we can do that. We can enforce our contractual rights, or we have a right without the tenant doing anything wrong, a no-fault eviction. We have the right to either evict the tenant who's not subject to any rent control, or use that popular one that, hey, we're going to renovate the unit. And by the way, if you had a unit that was really under market value and you really needed to get a sizable rent increase, you know, when you evict the tenant, you'd have to fix the unit anyway. So it's not that big of a deal. You'd always want to renovate that unit and just comply with the law dealing with the renovation eviction, and we can proceed forward with that. If you don't want to do a renovation eviction and you're outside the county of Los Angeles and you're subject, or even if you're inside the county of Los Angeles and you're subject to statewide rent control, right now, today, you can raise every tenant, notwithstanding the pandemic, you can raise rent, the current rent per month for those counties that I just talked about, which is Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, or LA County, is 8.6%. So if you're happy with an 8.6% rent increase, you can do that right now. The pandemic doesn't stop you from doing so. So that's a brief overlook on the pandemic and statewide rent control as it relates to property basically outside of the county of Los Angeles. Unfortunately, let's move over to the county of Los Angeles, and let's first talk about the city of Los Angeles.
Can I ask you two questions before we move on to the next one? So for the rent control, if it's a single family residence, but let's say that it's in an LLC, does that make a difference at all?
No, it doesn't make a difference if it's an LLC, but if it is owned by a corporation or a REIT, a real estate investment trust, then you are subject to statewide rent control and you would be limited to an 8.6% rent increase. But if I have a townhouse, a condo owned by an individual or an LLC, or a single family home, or property that was built less than 15 years ago, and I'm not subject to a local rent control ordinance, then I can raise the rent to market level. So whatever the market level is, I have the right to do so. And as an aside, if you're raising the rent 10% or less, it's a 30-day notice. If you're raising the rent more than 10%, Jose, what kind of a notice do I have to give?
If you're raising the rent by more than what?
More than 10%.
I'd probably say 60-day.
That's what most people would say, and that's why I asked the question, because you'd be wrong. There is no 60-day rent increases anymore. It's a 90-day notice. So if you're raising rent more than 10%, and you have the right to do so because you're not subject to any rent control, for example, then it has to be a 90-day notice. 10% or less is a 30. So if you're raising the rent under statewide rent control 8.6, then it would only be a 30-day notice.
Yeah, it really does seem as though, Dennis, I mean, I'm not in the state of California, but based on what I'm hearing from you, who's affected most by this are those who own multifamily, multiple unit apartment buildings.
That is correct.
Yeah, and it's very specifically segmented to that particular crowd, correct?
Correct. So in other words, they give you a lot of play for a single family residence, but that's not necessarily true in LA County.
Okay.
So, but outside of LA County, that is true.
So the second question that I had on that, Dennis, is how do you determine the 30 days, like for the renovation period? Like a kitchen remodel can take 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Is there any rules and guidelines on that, or?
Absolutely. When you hire your contractor, you're saying to the contract, this is going to take longer than 30 days or you're not hired.
Perfect.
It's as simple as that, because it's got to take 30 days. So I don't care if he, plays chess in the afternoon in your place, but it's going to take 30 days and he is going to pull a permit, either an electrical or a plumbing permit,
Perfect.
But by pulling permits and getting permission, it's going to take 30 days just for approval from our wonderful building and safety officials, right? By the time they come back and finally write off, the whole project's going to take longer than 30 days. But it makes no difference. You're going to find somebody that's going to take 30 days or you're not hiring them. So
great. Okay. Let's get into LA County and Los Angeles City.
So let's do LA City, since this is probably a telecast that might be viewed by children. I can only tell you that if you own property in the city of Los Angeles, you are proverbially screwed. Literally, this is the worst abuse that a government can foster upon income property owners. It is truly a taking of every right that you have. And if you don't believe me, then I'll tell you what the significance is. And that is, you can be a tenant in an apartment or a house, a single family home that was just built brand new, even though it doesn't make any difference. And you can avoid paying rent for 36 months. This is based on the moronic City Council for Los Angeles, or the criminal called Eric Garcetti, if everybody knows who that is. You can sit in a unit for 36 months and not pay a penny. The landlord has no right to bring forth an unlawful detainer. The landlord has no right to seek a regular civil lawsuit for the money. The landlord has no right to terminate the tenancy, but let's say it's a single family home, and let's pretend the lease was over the end of February, this month, February 28th. You can't ask the tenant to move. You can't serve a notice to quit. You can't file an unlawful detainer. You can't file a regular civil lawsuit, and the guy can sit there for 36 months. You can take a gun and shoot him. No, I'm just kidding. But, I mean, that's basically what your rights are, which are absolutely no right. And this is where we are in the city of Los Angeles. And I don't care whether it's a single-family home, a multi-unit. I don't care when it was built. You have one option, and that is you apply for the rent relief program by going to that website called housingiskey.com. That's housing, key.com. You can apply. Now, when you apply, your tenant is sent an invitation that says, please apply. Now, if you get the money, and I've gotten the money for my units, I have a unit, an 8-unit building in a city called, actually it's 9 units, in a city called Studio City. And I had a tenant there, and I got $22,000. But what's going to happen is the rent relief program will send your tenant an invitation and say, hey, you're a landlord applied, and all you got to do is apply. Now, if the landlord gets the money from the California Rent Relief Program, then that means that the tenant's obligation is satisfied. So who on earth wouldn't want the government to pay your bills, right? Who would? Because ultimately, if the bill is not paid, somewhere in the future, and I'll tell you when that date is, and I'm only hoping, if you're watching this, that you're sitting down. But who wouldn't want that? Because that means someone else pays your bills and you don't have any obligation to pay it anymore. Well, we're finding that so many tenants get the invitation and do nothing. Well, if they do nothing, that means the landlord's not going to get paid. So what does that mean? That means that for 36 months, you do not get revenue and you have nothing that you can do with it. And that spans from the period of March 2020 through February 2023. Did you hear that? Let me repeat it. March 2020 through February 2023. Can you believe that I have all these dates in my head? It's crazy, but I deal with them. I do have some notes here, but I haven't referred to them yet.
You're sharp as a tack, my friend. Well, and if I'm understanding correctly, it's predicated upon the tenant has to actually do something. Otherwise, you're not going to get the money.
Absolutely. And if the tenant does something, you can't do anything under the laws for the city of Los Angeles. And in fact, if you bring forth, let's say, make a demand, you got to pay me, I'll serve you a 3-day notice, the tenant has a right to sue you for harassment. I kid you not.
Yeah, I was going to say, so like now you got paid on that one. Now what happens moving forward? Because I'm imagining that the person's still not paying. So do you have to apply again?
That person is paying.
Okay.
So I'm okay. But then again, I'm Dennis Block. So, they had a little bit of fear in their hearts. Notwithstanding that, during this 36-month period, let me ask you, Jose, do you have to pay your mortgage payment?
Yes.
Do you have to pay property taxes?
Yes.
And what about that water and sewage for the building? You got to pay that?
Depends who it's assigned to on the lease.
Who's paying for water and sewage?
Owner.
Correct. There's only one water meter generally. And let's pretend that the heater goes out on this guy who hasn't paid rent going into the 19th month. Does the landlord have an obligation to fix the heater?
Yes.
And if he doesn't fix the heater and he gets an order to comply from building and safety, and then he still doesn't, you could get a letter from the city's attorney's office that this is a criminal warrant at that point, a criminal offense. So where does the landlord get the money from? The tenant's not even complying with housing is key. And by the way, if you happen to be a poor commercial landlord, the same rules apply in the city of Los Angeles, I kid you not, except for one further small little detail. The housingiskey.com, the California Rent Relief Program, doesn't apply to commercial tenancies. So you can go with those same 36 months and you get nothing. there's nothing for you to apply. And the guy whose restaurant is operating at full board with the patrons coming out the door, but he's going to tell you, Mr. Landlord, I'm sorry, I'm not making the same profit. And you can't bring forth an eviction lawsuit against a commercial tenant in the city of Los Angeles. This is criminal. This is like the Russian invasion right here, except it's being handled by our wonderful city council. Are there any kind of evictions that we can do in the city of Los Angeles? Well, let's pretend the rental agreement says only 2 people can live there, and he brings in 4 more. So that has nothing to do with rent. And of course, these 4 more people, well, they're using more water and more problems that can occur. So in that case, can we then bring forth an unlawful detainer action based on a violation of the lease having nothing to do with the with the non-payment of rent issue? And the answer, no. You can't bring forth an eviction based on unauthorized occupants until March of 2023. And if you're looking at a calendar, that's about a year from today. And you can't bring forth an eviction based on pets. So it says no dogs, he brings in a dog. You can do an eviction based on an alteration, like the guy changed the locks, or he put up a satellite dish, or installed, cameras to the outside of the building. That's a good one. Possibly if the guy has a very, very small methamphetamine lab in the living room, that would be a case that we could do an eviction on. Nuisance types of evictions that we can do in the city of LA. But otherwise, we're pretty well locked down. So they basically took every property right that we have, every right of contract, and gave you exactly nothing. But they do say, look, we're not telling you that we're giving you free rent in the city of Los Angeles. No. We're going to allow you to get your rent from the tenant, even if you don't get it from housingiskey.com. You just merely have to wait. We're going to defer the rent. Okay, defer it to when? Well, I've already told you that in the city of Los Angeles, the eviction moratorium is over in March of the year 2023. So what you're telling me is that in March of 2023, I can then serve a 3-day notice and go forward and at least start the damn eviction at that point. I've waited now. This is the 36th month, for God's sakes. Can I at least do it now? The answer, no, can't do it. Well, when can I get my money? Well, all the rent that was owed, again, please be sitting down, Mr. Landlords. And I know, or at least get on the phone to your broker and sell your damn building and move to Texas. But all the rent that was owed from March of 2020 through February of 2023, that rent is owed in 1 year after the moratorium is over. 1 year after wait a second, the moratorium is going to be over in March of 2023. 1 year from then, you mean I can sue for it in March of 2024? Yes, that's when you're going to be able to sue the tenant for that money. But wait a second, where is that pesky tenant? You think that tenant stayed there in your building? Or do you think that tenant left for places unknown? So while you're going to be able to bring forth that beautiful small claims court action or a regular civil lawsuit, because the guy's out, it's not an eviction, where are you going to find him? He's not there. So basically, you've just given up the money. And why did you give up the money? Because you were ordered to give up the money by our governmental institutions. And this is truly, without question, without any levity, it's truly an assault on income property owners. It's theft to income property owners. And the city of Los Angeles, in my opinion, will pay dearly because these lawsuits that are being brought will hold the city accountable to anybody. Of course, they'll go bankrupt, but cities can't go bankrupt. They'll be held accountable to the landlords, assuming the courts go the way the law is written. But of course, they don't care. These politicians won't be in office. Eric Garcetti will be in India getting trampled by an elephant, I hope.
Hey, tell us how you really feel, Dennis.
Yes, I don't want to seem bitter, but this is where we are. But anybody out there, we do have a toll-free number that's over my shoulder there, 1-800-77-EVICT. And if you want to call me up to bitch, I love hearing it. Or if you've got a situation where you say, Dennis, I know this case will work. Well, then we'll listen to your story. And then sometimes we actually do bring forth cases. I don't want to dissuade you that there is a path that we do bring forth cases. I had just last week alone, we had 35 lockouts by the sheriff's offices on case that we won. That was last week alone. So we are doing bunches of eviction, but we have to pick and choose. City of Los Angeles is pretty well clamped down in terms of what we want. And also for the city of Los Angeles, let's, for example, you have a single family home, not subject to any rent control, and you want to move. So you have a tenant in possession, you want to sell, and can you sell? Yeah, you can sell, but you can't get the tenant out. So you can't sell your property tenant occupied. That's not going to sell well. Let's pretend you just bought this house. You just bought it, and you want to move into your own damn house. That's why I bought it. And the tenant's on a month-to-month tenancy. Can't do it. Got to wait till March of 2023, because in the law for the city of Los Angeles, you're not allowed to do a no-fault eviction. There are no-fault evictions. So you just merely have to hang on to that house, whether you can afford it or not. And there's nothing that you can do based on this law. Okay, so that's the wonderful city of Los Angeles. Let's move on.
Which cities are part of the Los Angeles city? Because I know that there's some misinformation there.
Good question. People think, for example, that a city like Studio City, where I have my building, or Encino, I'm going through the San Fernando Valley right now, or Sherman Oaks, or Woodland Hills, or Van Nuys, all those are really just areas of the city of Los Angeles, a place called Wilmington, a place called San Pedro. These are really part of the city of Los Angeles. There are incorporated cities like Burbank is a city, Pasadena, Glendale. These are all real cities. A city where I personally live, Calabasas, a civilized place to own property. That is an incorporated city. It has nothing to do with the city of Los Angeles, okay? But if you have a place called Arleta or Sylmar, or Hollywood, those are really just places in the city of Los Angeles, okay? So you got that? And that's all part of Los Angeles. So, gee, I'm not in Los Angeles. I'm in Woodland Hills, or I'm in a city called Winnetka. No, you're in the city of Los Angeles. And if you want to sell your house, or, you're disabled, I want to move back into my own house. Sorry, wait till March of 2023. And by the way, while we're on the subject here, the politicians are passing these laws because there's a pandemic and people are financially affected by the pandemic, right? I mean, that's the concept, right? Nobody's affected by the pandemic. I don't know what these people are talking about. Maybe when the pandemic first started back in March of 2020, maybe then somebody lost their damn job and couldn't pay the rent. But we're in what? What month is this? We're February of 2022. Anybody who wants a job can get a job. No one is affected by the pandemic. If you just got the pandemic, okay, you're either over it or you're dead in 2 weeks. So really, on the basis, who really is affected financially by the pandemic that we're still extending these protections, as the city council did of Los Angeles, for another year? Who's really affected? What situation is out there that they can't get a job? We have an economy. It's moving. Employers like myself are desperate to hire people, and you can't get people to work. So the reality is that there's no one currently infected. So it's criminal that these city councils, and also for the county of LA, which I'm going to get into in a second, are coming forth with this pure garbage. No one is affected by the pandemic. No one. But I'll have a case, for example, where a guy just moved into a place. He pays the first month's rent in the city of Los Angeles. He pays the security. The rent is $4,500 per month. He paid his first rent and never paid again, and says, COVID, leave me alone. Well, you know what? If the politicians ordered the bank doors to be opened and said, please walk inside and take what you want, I got news for you. people are going to walk into a bank and take what they want, even though the money is not there. So if you have moronic politicians that are creating laws that don't need to exist, and even if they do exist, you can't put the financial burden on one person. You can't do that. If you want to give money away, which is insane, by the way, and ruined our economy, then at least filter it out through our tax dollars that everybody's using. But you can't make one segment of society do this. In any event, let me get off the soapbox.
One last question on that topic. What about a 24-hour notice in LA City? Does that work or no? Like let's say that they're not allowing you entry to your own property.
That's a tough eviction case. We do those. It is a tough eviction case because the tenant can say, look, I'm not letting you in because of COVID and I've been very careful. So it really depends the reason why you want to get in. Let's pretend you want to refinance or you want to have an appraiser come in, which certainly is permissible. The tenant can use that, and it's a tough call whether, when I get to court on a case like that, whether a judge is going to say, well, he was concerned about his family and his health and all that garbage, which is exactly what it is. So that means you can't even get a refi on your loan because you can't get the appraiser in. So this is the problems that we hit. Okay, let's move on because I think we're running out of time. Let's move over to the county. In the county of Los Angeles, I have a lot more play right now. We're still tied up a little bit, but the time clock is running. So when I talk about the county of Los Angeles, I am excluding the city of Los Angeles. Okay, so again, if it's Winnetka or Van Nuys or Sherman Oaks or the San Pedro, that's all part of the city. But if I'm in a wonderful place like Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, I don't know, make up some more cities here, Pasadena, Glendale, West Covina, those are all cities that are not in the city of LA, but they're in the county of LA. I have a lot more play on that. Number one, in those areas, if you want to move into your own house and you bought that house prior to June 30th on 2021, then you have the right to move into that house, but you have to pay relocation, even though your property is not under rent control. The relocation, I'm looking for the number, that's what the relocation is, depending on how many bedrooms you have. So if I look at one that says one bedroom, a standard, it's $8,662. So that's a thing, depending on how many bedrooms and the quality of the person who's there, whether they're over 62 or children. So you have to, if the property was bought prior to June 30th of 2021. If you just bought a property in the county of LA, like a single family home or a duplex, and you want to move into one, you cannot move in, period, until you have to wait till January of 2023. So that's about 10 months from now you can move in. So the County of Los Angeles also has a no-fault provision until we get to basically till January of 2023. You can do a renovation eviction, like I was explaining, for statewide, but that, again, you have to wait till January of 2023. The only thing you can do is you can move into your own home or a close family member, assuming it was purchased prior to June 30th, 2021. Close family members are defined as grandparents, parents, yourself or your spouse, your kids or your grandkids, not your brother. Okay, so it's kind of up and down on the family tree there, not sideways. And you can move in. You do have to pay relocation. If you wait till January, then if you're only under statewide rent control, then you only have to pay 1 month's rent if you're subject to statewide rent control. So on that basis, you probably want to wait until January of 2023. Right now, you can also go for non-payment of rent. You can't go for non-payment of rent in the city of Los Angeles if they claim COVID, but you can go for non-payment of rent in the county of Los Angeles excluding the city of Los Angeles, for rent owed from October 2021, I told you to get a pen, through October 2021 through March of 2022. For that period, you can serve the new 3-day notice form, which is on my website, evict123.com. You have to apply for rent relief under the housingiskey.com. And if you've waited 20 days, then you can file an eviction lawsuit. Those cases tend to get slowed down on the basis that we have to wait from a rejection from the California Rent Relief Board before we can finish the case, though we have found some ways around that. But those cases tend to get slowed down in terms of evicting a tenant in the county of Los Angeles for non-payment of rent. The silver lining in the county is we're going to wait till April. Then my phones will really be ringing, because in the month of April, we're not slowed down at all. We can serve a standard old 3-day notice, not the new ones, but the old ones that we used to use. And we can serve that for the April's rent or thereafter. We don't have to apply for housingiskey.com. And we can do evictions in the county. So that's going to be kind of like an opening of the floodgates that all these tenants that got used to never paying rent. Oh, and by the way, do you know that at least 5 times a week, I have a landlord call me to tell me that the tenant who hasn't paid rent in a month of Sundays just bought a new car? At least 5 times. And I'm thinking to myself, well, of course they bought a new car. They didn't have to pay the rent, so they got a new car. Or I got clients who call and tell me, I went on social media. I saw my tenant who hasn't paid me rent in Cancun. They're celebrating. So this is the biggest joke, the biggest boondoggle by our elected politicians. But in any event, for the landlords who have been struggling outside of the city of Los Angeles, come April, I've got a clear run. I've got a run now that gets slowed down, and we have been successful. In the county of Los Angeles, if they bring in extra people, they bring in a dog, I can evict. I can't do that in the city, but I can evict for a FIDO. I can evict for the extra people. I can evict for alterations to the premises. We get a lot of cases where you rent to A, tenant A without your permission brings in tenant B thereafter, and then magically tenant A just up and leaves, leaving B behind. You never took any rent from B. We do a lot of those types of evictions to evict B. We also find out that if you have a vacant unit, make sure that that unit is pretty well secured, because you're going to find that magically you got some cockroaches in there who are claiming that they released the premises, and it's straight trespass situation. You're going to call the police. You're going to tell the police, this place was locked up. These are trespassers. Arrest them. They'll show you some phony lease that they made up, the occupants will, with John Smith as the landlord. And then the police officer will look at the landlord and go, look, this is a civil matter. I can't arrest them. Please call Dennis Block, because that's what the police always do. They tell them to call me. So make sure your property is secured. So we do those types of evictions. Those are called forcible detainer evictions. And those we can do. So the county, once again, is going to be pretty much all over, even with the renovation evictions come January of 2023. So that's in about 10 months. You'll be able to move in a family member by paying very little or no relocation money. If you did buy the property prior to June 30th of 2021, you can move in a close family member now, but you're going to have to pay substantial relocation money, anywhere from about $8,000 to $21,000, depending on how many bedrooms the place has. But again, if you're not in the county of Los Angeles, we're fat city here. We can actually enforce our property rights. Wow, what a surprise. We can enforce property rights. Inside the county, we have some play. And then in the city of Los Angeles, it's a total abortion. It's exactly what, I don't know what else I could call it, but it's a total abortion. So a lot of information. Go back and listen to this telecast. Also on my website, I've got a video too that I've done for the Apartment Owners Association. It goes for a couple of hours and goes into a little bit more detail But this is the state of affairs that we are in right now. And I don't know if we have any more questions that you guys wanted to ask me.
I do. Do you have one as well too, Aaron?
I'm good. I just had an observation.
Go ahead. Give me your observation first.
Well, it's wild to me because I'm in Florida, right? So it's wild to me to hear that you have to pay tenants to leave.
Oh,
That is not something that we experience here. So my key takeaway from this conversation prior to what Jose is going to ask you is two things. One is if you have any questions about evictions, you do what the police do and you call Dennis Block. The second is that if you don't want to deal with all of that after he helps you evict the tenants, go ahead and sell your property with Jose and then bring the capital to Florida because we can help you down here.
Let me tell you something. That's the best thing. Either Florida or Texas, but Florida is a wonderful place with a wonderful governor who hopefully will be our next president.
That's great. Last question, Dennis. If you move in a family member, are there any restrictions as to how long that family member has to stay in the property?
Right now, it's 3 years for the county of Los Angeles. If you're doing it right now, 3 years. After that, then they don't, under state law, they don't really have a time period when you're evicting a tenant, but you don't want to make it out like it was subterfuge that, hey, I just put him in for a week and then he moved out. So I'd keep him there for at least 1 year. I do have a final story that I want to tell, and then I really am out of here. And that is, it's about a landlord that was walking on the beach. And as he's walking on the beach, he looks down and he sees a little lantern buried in the sand, and he picks it up and he rubs it, and out comes a genie. And the genie, who had been stuck in this lantern for thousands of years, says, you know what? Thank you so much. I'm going to grant you one wish and one wish only, whatever you want. Well, this landlord was kind of a philanthropic landlord. So he says, you know what? I wish for world peace. The genie looks at him and says, you know, there's like about 6 billion people in the world, and it's somewhat of a tall order. Maybe you could give me another wish. He goes, okay, I wish for a cure for cancer. Genie looks at him and says, you know, the body is pretty intricate, and honestly, I think it's above my skill level to figure out a cure. Give me one more wish. I swear to you, this I will do for you. The guy goes, okay, I'm a landlord. I want you to do away with all rent control. The genie looks at him and says, let's go back to that world peace one. In any event, thank you very much, guys. And anybody needs me, give me a call.
Thank you so much, Dennis. We really appreciate you taking the time. And for our viewers, thank you so much, Aaron.
Yeah, appreciate you guys taking the time. You just got a healthy dose of not only eviction rules and laws in your geographic area, but also kind of the scope of some things that are happening at the moment. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Appreciate our guest and look forward to reconnecting soon.